Oh, hey. Greetings, everyone. It's Naomi Wolf with Outspoken, which you can also find on Daily Clout. And I'm broadcasting every day because, to my amazement, we're up to number 116 today, up from number 135 in podcasts in the US. Of course, we're heard around the world, but we're number 116 today for news commentary. And that's kind of amazing considering it's me in a guest room without a giant team. We operate on a shoestring on donations and subscriptions, and just bringing you opinion, unbiased journalism. I feel it's unbiased, fact based, I should say. Everyone has their own orientations to content. No spin. We don't take checks from anyone. We're not FARA agents. We're not Mossad agents. We're not Qatari agents. We're just actual journalists. I'm just a real old fashioned commentator. And that is being validated, the need for that, I'm so moved to say, by reaching number 116 on news commentary podcasts in the US, like outpacing podcasts like CNN. So incredible. Let's keep it going. And as a result, I'm coming to you every day. I'm going to, build on that momentum, hopefully. So you can help if you care about my effort to bring you stories, especially related to liberty, freedoms, civil rights, civil liberties, human rights around the world, democracy. If you care about that, you can help by subscribing, sharing. We're still heavily suppressed on many, many platforms. I see active suppression right now. And so just to bring you up to date for today, Wednesday, December 17th, 2025. This week has been, of course, a very painful week. It started with the Bondi Beach massacre, in which 16 people, at my last count, are murdered and at least 40 hospitalized. Deaths including a 10-year-old girl, a Holocaust survivor, an elderly couple trying to stop the shooter. Two rabbis, volunteering just to bring a joyful celebration of the Festival of Lights, Hanukkah, to the people, not just Jews, right? It was an open event for all the people on Bondi Beach, and that, that kind of event, which was common standard in a high trust society like Australia, high trust societies until recently, the UK, France, Canada, the United States, that openness seems to be being targeted. The suspects, one died in the crossfire, but they appear to be a Pakistani Muslim father and son. And they had been on the radar of Australian authorities prior to the attack, the murderous attack. And many, many questions are being asked right now, as they should be, certainly by the Israeli community and the Jewish community, I should say, in Australia. Questions from the authorities like, the dead rabbi had sent a letter, the murdered rabbi, Eli Schlanger, had sent a letter to Albanese, the head of the country, saying, please do more to protect the Jews of Australia. We're suffering so many anti-Semitic incidents. The government of Israel had sent them a warning that there were likely to be anti-Semitic attacks against Jews. There had been many, many warnings that were ignored. And something else that is being rightly questioned is that a police station was 1 minute away from the shooting, within a sight line of the shooting, of this massacre. And yet the Bondi Beach police appeared but didn't intervene for 20 minutes. And the shooters were able, kind of leisurely, to reload their magazines in no hurry at all, facing no opposition except for one heroic fruit seller who tackled one of the shooters, briefly disarmed him before ending up in the hospital himself. But the official response, there's a video now of, unfortunately, female police officers, Australian police officers, cowering behind parked cars, not intervening, not moving forward. It's scary to be a cop. I get it, but that's your job, and you're armed, right? They disarmed the people of Australia a few years ago. They asked them to turn in their weapons, and there are images of piles of Australian guns that people, trusted their government, gave their guns to the government. They were assured that they would be safe. They're not safe. There is nothing more dangerous, as we have seen in Britain, certainly in Canada, nothing more dangerous than a disarmed population. Thank God for our Second Amendment in the United States. Always it's under attack, but Australia literally crossed the Rubicon, giving up their gun rights sort of permanently, formally, legally. The state is armed, citizens are not armed. If one citizen had been armed, maybe a dozen people would be alive today who are now sadly murdered. So it was a horrible way to start the Hanukkah celebration for Jews everywhere, but also for non-Jews, Christians, moderate Muslims, anyone who wants, Hindus, Buddhists, anyone who wants a free, open, secular, I shouldn't say secular, inclusive, freedom of conscience, civil society. We've just got to face the fact, and I hate to say it because I never want to paint any race, religion, ethnicity, country of origin in a broad brush, but radical Islam, I'm always going to qualify it because I love Islam. I love the Holy Quran, love it. It's an Abrahamic religion. It has the same ethical roots as Judaism and Christianity, but radical Islam, fundamentalist Islam, is being weaponized, as I'm saying over and over again these days, to destroy, subvert, overwhelm, break apart Western civil societies, pluralistic civil societies. And in Britain, it's not a pluralistic society by law. It's a Church of England. The state, it is a state religion. Christianity is a state religion. A teacher was arrested for telling students that Britain was a Christian country. It is literally legally a Christian country. It has been Church of England since the reign of King Henry VIII. There was a lot of blood spilled to establish whether it would be a Catholic or a Christian or a Protestant country. It's a Protestant country. Church of England, that's the religion. Technically France is a Catholic country. Italy is a Catholic country. Not every Western European country has no state religion the way the United States does. But whatever the status of a state religion or no state religion, radical Islam is being weaponized, joined with communism, which is crazy because they have so little in common ideologically, and used by globalists to break apart civil society, to close down open civic activities like the Bondi Beach celebration, the lighting of the menorah in public, which we keep doing night after night here on the North Shore of Boston, where we're located right now. But also Christmas celebrations, Christmas markets, non-pro-Palestinian protests, St. George flag protests, just normal civil society is, Christmas shopping is being run into the ground in the West by this unholy alliance of radical Islam and communism under the deployment of globalists. I've never seen in my whole study of history, 2,000 years of Western history, I've never seen such a bizarre alliance. Effective, but bizarre. And, as I've often said, if you go by history, none of these people who think they'll be dividing the spoils or having a seat at the table when, the West is the Christian West, the Judeo-Christian West, the secular West is crushed to dust. Communists execute their useful idiots. We had a conversation with a former inhabitant of the Soviet Union last night at a Hanukkah celebration, and he reminded us, we know it, but he lived it, that communists get rid of their useful idiots. It's an actual Leninist term when they're done with them. And Islamists get rid of their fellow travelers, and globalists get rid of the people they've used. They throw them right under the bus to attain their ends. So no one involved in this unholy attack on the West should think that it's going to end well for them. This is not a threat. It's an observation from history. But nonetheless, they're aligned and they're going for it against the West. So what I want to talk about today is three stories, essentially. One is that the attack on Bondi wasn't in a vacuum, and the legacy media isn't really following these stories the way they should be. Thank God for dissident platforms like X and Substack, where people are following these stories. But there's been a rash of attacks on Jews subsequent to the Bondi Beach massacre, Sunday into Monday. And today is only Wednesday. So we're going to talk about that. Then I just want to say, I keep saying over and over, they start with the Jews, but the Christians are next. They start with the Jews, but the Christians are next. And the tragedy of Western students no longer being taught solid history is that there is a memory hole about the fact that the Christian West was at war with Islam during the Crusades, under the Ottoman Empire, and it's been centuries of struggle. These religions have not cohabited peacefully except for a few brief shining moments. I always love remembering the golden age of Spain in the 15th into the 16th centuries, when Christians, Jews, and Muslims did live together in a gorgeous eruption of scholarship and poetry and artistry and mathematics. But that was brief. It didn't last long. And also, recently in the secular West, or in the kind of post-religious West, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists lived peacefully together. And now what I'm warning is that because of jihadi attacks and ideology whipped up by interests like Soros funding all these NGOs, funding these protests and encampments and so on, we're seeing a kind of move back to the Middle Ages in which people are being targeted for their religion. And did you forget you started the show on YouTube for 9:30 on leftism being the root of all evil? I don't know what you're talking about. I'd love to know. There are a lot of fake Naomi Wolfs out there. But tell me more or post the link, because I'm not sure what you mean. And these bad actors use the left, right? They use radical Islam. They use sympathetic college students who don't, who hear the language of genocide and don't want to be on the side of the genociders, right? With the problem arising now that there's a ceasefire in Gaza, the hostages were returned, and there's no more genocide in Gaza because the hostages are returned. There's a ceasefire. So that really calls into question, was the bloodshed of the last few years in Gaza even necessary? If the hostages had been returned, perhaps thousands and thousands of Palestinians wouldn't have been died or maimed. I'm not justifying war ever, but I'm saying, like, logically, the protests against Israel need to pause and reflect, because it is now time for Palestine to reciprocate and for us to have a peaceful two-state solution. But let's see what people are yelling at me about. Laszlo Torok says nothing more than their faith. Really, read the Talmud and think who is attacking whom. We are getting depopulated worldwide, so whom are running the show? The grammar challenges there, no disrespect, suggest to me that this is a troll in another country with an assumed identity. Let me know if I'm mistaken. Don't want to disrespect you. But who's running? I don't even know where to start with that. The Talmud, a lot of misinformation is circulating around the internet about the Talmud. And there are a couple of quotes that keep recurring. And I'm going to ask, some rabbinical scholars about those quotes. They seem to be real quotes from the Talmud, right? I need to triple check, but my initial verification indicated that they were real quotes. Now, let me just say the Talmud is not the Torah. The Talmud is a lot of commentary by a lot of people. Okay, it's arguments by scholars against scholars, counter arguments by scholars against scholars. The Torah is the sacred text. The Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, the prophets and the writings, the 5 books of Moses and the Hebrew Bible is the sacred text. The memes floating around saying, oh my God, this is Judaism, from the Talmud are not from sacred texts. Again, the Talmud is a lot of arguments, commentary. So you could go into Sharia arguments going back hundreds of years, and the Talmud goes back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, more than a millennium, I believe. And you could find horrible quotes, anti-Christian quotes, anti-Jewish quotes, anti-woman quotes, anti-gay quotes, and you could lift those out of context and you could say, this is Islam. Or you could certainly go back to horrible quotes from the church fathers, I'm sorry, going back to the 4th century, saying that women are, sinful in their souls or pretty packaging around sacks of worms, or horrible medieval statements from Christian scholars about women, about infidels, calling other women witches, calling Jews horrible names, calling Muslims horrible names. And you could lift that out of context and say, see, all Christians believe that. But the truth is, history is very long, and people believed a lot of things under duress, or when they were being attacked, surrounded by other religions, or when they had no knowledge of other religions, or when there was an inquisition and you could be killed if you didn't toe the line about other religions, or the Crusades, where you could be killed at sword point if you didn't convert or support a certain line about other religions. And it's just ignorant to take, 2 or 3 medieval random people, in an argument, saying things that don't stand up to scrutiny or that are, very bad out of context, and saying that's a whole religion. It's just not true. It's incredibly ignorant. Figure out what the Talmud is, read a book, go to synagogue. We don't engage with that kind of commentary from hundreds of years ago in any synagogue. That's not what we're praying. That's not in our prayer book. It's not the Torah. It's not the sacred text. And I'm tired of it, right? I mean, I could cherry pick Christianity or Islam, and find appalling things. But I don't want to do that, because any sophisticated person knows that a whole religion, Christianity or Islam, is not the horrible statements of a few ignorant people or bad actors. So, even if it shows up in a sacred commentary like Sharia law or the letters of the church fathers, I mean, St. Paul said women shouldn't speak in church. Does that mean that all of Christianity is a misogynist religion that says women should have no voice? No, obviously, duh. Things have moved on, and I would be very, very ignorant to say, see, St. Paul says, women shouldn't speak in church. Therefore, all Christians must hate women and think they're stupid and have nothing to say. It's very, very ignorant. So I hope that was a response. And boy, I'm getting lots of, I don't know if these are real comments or trolls and bots. The trolls and bots have definitely been unleashed. But Tim Holmes says, you started out perfect. We are back to the Middle Ages. What you missed is simply zealot Zionism. It's only matured. I mean, give me an example. I'm so tired of all this name calling. And it's so ignorant, and it reduces a sophisticated discussion of religions and how we can live together in peace, which is our job now. And honestly, if you look at Islam, if you look at Jesus's message, and if you look at Judaism, we're supposed to be living together in peace. All right. So that's my preamble. Now let me share the screen. There's been a lot of discussion, as I mentioned, about Bondi Beach, but there have been other hate crimes. And let's see, you can now see my screen. I'm going to go ahead and play this.
Confrontation between two men and a group of young Jewish men returning from Hanukkah. Tonight, the NYPD Hate Crimes Unit is investigating. And good evening, everyone, at 6 o'clock. I'm Bill Ritter.
And I'm Liz Joe. Mayor Adams is calling what happened despicable and hateful violence. A group of young men say that they were targets of anti-Jewish comments during the confrontation that was caught on camera.
This happened as they were returning to Brooklyn. This after attending a Hanukkah ceremony yesterday in Manhattan. Tonight, both the NYPD and the U.S. Justice Department say they're investigating.
Eyewitness News reporter Crystal Cranmore is live in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, with our lead story tonight. Crystal.
Good evening, Liz and Bill. Well, those young men were actually headed to Chabad Lubavitch, just a few blocks from here, where they're temporarily staying and studying religious texts. They actually hopped off here at the Nostrand Avenue station and called 911 after that alleged assault. Cell phone video captured heated moments on a southbound 3 train in Crown Heights. The footage circulating on social media appears to capture a man violently grabbing a passenger's jacket and a second suspect hurling threats. What wasn't captured, according to the NYPD, the anti-Semitic comments the suspects allegedly made toward the victims, both student residents at Chabad Lubavitch World Headquarters on Eastern Parkway.
It was very painful to me because I myself was on the train, not on the same train as them, but I myself was on the train doing similar things that they were doing.
According to authorities, the victims were leaving a Hanukkah celebration in Union Square when they got into an argument with the suspects before boarding the train. The verbal altercation escalated until the victims managed to call police at the Nostrand Avenue stop. Police say no one was injured, but those visiting this iconic site this holiday say anti-Semitism is a growing concern.
Every day we come to expect that something bad's going to happen, and our response is always the same: to respond with light, to respond with being more Jewish.
The video capturing the attention of officials with the U.S. Department of Justice, promising to investigate. Mayor Adams also taking to X to say in part, we can never allow such hate and anti-Semitism to persist in our city.
So that happened. It's so interesting. You guys need to really understand what's at stake here. The targets of the Bondi Beach attack, this incident on the subway in which these young men, students, were attacked, these are not kind of random or even typical conservative or reform Jewish gatherings, or even, mainstream Orthodox Jewish gatherings. I mean, they're becoming more mainstream. But Chabad is, and DBO Johnson says, I commend your patience with these ignorant demons in the comment section. Thank you. I have to, right? Like, otherwise we would just give up and I'd be curled up in a fetal position. But Chabad is, Brian and I go to Chabad. It's really, as I wrote in my last essay, really changed our lives. And Brian's Catholic, right? And they are putting zero pressure on him to convert. They're welcoming my non-Jewish husband. If I brought my, Greek Orthodox stepson, or my Buddhist aunts and uncles, or my, Native American shaman mom. They would welcome her. They welcome everyone. They love everyone. They're a really extraordinary group of people. And as you saw from the young man who said, we expect bad things to happen, but we respond with more light. They, I don't know how they do it. It was founded by someone named the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I believe in the 1950s. He had immigrated here of course, post-Holocaust. And instead of creating a sectarian kind of version of Jihadi Judaism that reacted to never again mass murder by Germans, with hatred and xenophobia and being insular and being what is the opposite of anti-Semitic, anti-Christian, anti-Islam, anti-non-Jew, they have the exact opposite orientation. They love everyone. They say, we love everyone. They welcome everyone. They, welcome non-Jews. They give them prayer books and cookies and, delicious snacks and treats. And they sit and study Torah with them. They teach them the prayers. They teach them the Psalms very patiently. And I've never known a group of Jews to do this, because you're not supposed to proselytize. They're not proselytizing, but they're just, I need to understand their mission better, but they're kind of bringing, their mission is really to welcome back straying and secular Jews. But they're welcoming everyone else too, which is really interesting. They never say, you're not Jewish, so too bad. And believe me, being married to a non-Jew, I have had plenty of heartbreaking situations in which I was looking for somewhere for us to get married, right? And I called my Reform synagogue where my mom had been on the board, and I had done fundraisers, and we'd circumcised our, I can't say who I circumcised, but a ritual circumcision had taken place in my family. And I went back to that synagogue and I was like, can you marry us? My husband's not Jewish. And the current rabbi said, no, you can't get married in the sanctuary because he's not Jewish. And I said, well, could we get married in the, gathering room where we have the parties? No, you can't get married in the gathering room. Finally, I said, can we get married in the coat room or out front? I mean, I was at that point being a little rude, I guess. And she's, the conversation ended, but I know I'm getting like horror faces, but this is the kicker. And I support LGBTQ rights. This rabbi was a lesbian married to a woman. And I pointed that out. I said, you won't marry us. This is a really good man. He's good to my Jewish kids. He's good to Jewish me. He's supporting my reconnecting with my faith tradition, but you won't marry us. And I said, you're married to a woman. And that's not halachic, meaning that's not, in strictly Orthodox Judaism, men and women are the only ones who get married. And she said, yes, but it's a Jewish woman. So it's these kinds of blinders, not welcoming non-Jews that we ran into a lot. And I can't blame those synagogues for it, because Jews have been under attack and people get insular, and look after kind of their own community when they're really under attack. And again, you're not supposed to proselytize. You're forbidden to seek converts in Judaism. So I don't really get how Chabad is so open-hearted, open-armed to all the non-Jews who go to Chabad events. But literally, I was sitting at a table at a Chabad event, and there were very devout Chabad participants from Canada and a rabbi at my table. And we were talking about the laws of kashrut, and these devout Chabad participants were trying to be kosher, just like I'm now trying to be more kosher. And it turns out they were all not Jewish, So there's this incredible revival, which is very beautiful and very aligned with history, right? Not of Judaism or Chabad stealing Christians from Christianity, but a lot of Christians or people, who are non-Jews who felt disconnected or didn't understand or were not moved by, very watered down Christian practice in churches. All modern religions tend to be watered down in the West. And they're reconnecting with God through Chabad and through the Torah, which is part of the Christian tradition too. So it's an awakening, and of Jews and non-Jews through Chabad. So I'm just really interested. Thank you for your patience with my going on this little detour. It's not really a detour. I'm very interested that it's Chabad, and it's heartbreaking, right? That it's Chabad that is the target of these attacks. And what you saw in that video clip, the reporter standing on Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, not too far from where we live when we're in Brooklyn, I should say, is the epicenter of Chabad practice. 770 Eastern Parkway is the center. It's where the rabbi, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was believed to be ushering in a kind of messianic era, right? He lived there, and the leadership lives there, and it's just such a gathering place for Chabad youth and students from around the world for high holy days, for Purim, for Passover, for celebrations. You see thousands of people celebrating in the streets, at that location, and those young people were attacked at that location. So I'm just worried that Chabad is being singled out. And why is Chabad being singled out? I suspect because it's such a magnetic movement right now, and it's so inclusive that if Chabad continues to be so successful in just loving everyone and bringing everyone who comes to Chabad, back to the Torah, and the Torah, which I've been reading in Hebrew with translation in a separate podcast, clearly shows that, the children of Israel have been connected to the land of Israel for thousands of years. Their sacred texts, whether you believe them or not, assign the land of Israel as the promised land to the Jewish people. That awareness is going to mess up the plans of radical Islamists who are using the plight of the Palestinian people to create a proxy war, right? So it's just much harder to call Jews names, to stigmatize them, to say that they're, snooty and insular and think they're better than you, and they run everything behind the scenes, and they discriminate against the Goyim, which just means nations, right? But all the anti-Semitic tropes really fall apart if you're a non-Jew and you go with a friend to Bondi Beach or to, the celebration in Danvers that we went to, right out there in the middle of the Danvers, Massachusetts downtown, where there's the rabbi. He's lighting the menorah. We sing the songs all together, super diverse group. And then the firefighters, dump gold-covered chocolates called gelt and toys from the ladder onto the crowd for all the children, right? Not just the Jewish children, all the children. It's very hard to keep stigmatizing Jews if you've gone to a Chabad gathering, because they're so inclusive and just so nice. And because you're going to actually read the actual Torah instead of some weird out of context, excerpt from a Talmudic argument from, hundreds and hundreds, if not more than a millennium ago. So I think that's why Chabad is being targeted. And that's really heartbreaking. It's like if I, God forbid, wanted to turn people against Islam, I wouldn't go after the least inclusive iteration of Islam. If I were a hateful person with bad intentions, which I'm not. I want us all to live together in harmony and peace. But I would target the Islamists, or the Christians for that matter, who are opening their arms and inviting everyone, welcoming everyone, and sharing God's word, with everyone. So that's just the horrible reality. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it just happened to be 2 Chabad targets in 3 days. But, I pray I'm wrong. I don't like the pattern recognition that it implies. And the other thing about Chabad is they're visible. You keep seeing this phrase visibly Jewish in news stories about people who are being attacked. What is visibly Jewish? Am I visibly Jewish? Probably. I kind of look Jewish. I look less Jewish when I color my hair, but probably if you lined me up with a lot of Swedes, you might say that woman looks Jewish. Other people look much more Jewish ethnically, right? But Chabadniks, whatever their hair or eye color or skin tone, they look Jewish, and they look Jewish by choice because they wear clothing that marks them out from the population. The women are very modestly dressed. They cover their hair usually with wigs if they're married. They don't cover their hair if they're not married, and they will wear tights instead of bare legs in the summertime. You can pretty much identify an Orthodox Jewish woman or girl, and you certainly can identify the men of Chabad. And I don't think I'm endangering anyone. I think we all know that it's a very distinctive black suit, white shirt. They wear what are called tzitzit, which are tassels, which are specified in Leviticus and I think also in Exodus by God in our sacred text. At the corners of your garments, it's a kind of blue and white silk garment with fringes that are visible. And sometimes they have curls and forelocks in front of their ears. They have beards. For High Holy Days, they wear literally fur hats from, 18th century Europe. I mean, it's kind of amazing, like a fashion in amber, like a kind of late 18th century to late 19th century Eastern European or Central European clothing that hasn't changed. But they're very distinctive. They're proud, each of these rabbis or rabbinical students has said, what's the response to bring more light and to be more Jewish, to act more Jewish, to look more Jewish? No one's hiding, right? So I fear that being able to identify people as members of this faith tradition so visibly, that this may not be the end of the attacks. But I'm not going to go into all the details. Hillel, which is not Chabad, it's a kind of more moderate organization, but it's on college campuses everywhere. In San Francisco, was firebombed a week ago. It barely made the news. I didn't even hear about it until this morning. And there are other attacks around the world. So we're under attack. And I personally have responded to that by ordering a really pretty Star of David, which I will share with you when it arrives, which I will wear around my neck. And, Brian's going to perfect my marksmanship skills, and I will apply for a concealed carry gun permit. And I will be armed. And I think it's at this point, as Laura Loomer says, she's making a lot of sense these days. All Jews should be armed. I think that's true. But I think at this point, all Christians should be armed too. We all should be armed, let me say, because we're heading into this medieval situation in which there's a holy war that is being fomented, setting people against each other for religious reasons. Let's see, lots of criticism, and I will address it. But I wanted to say I expect more to come. And let me go to one more piece of this riff, which is still a kind of mysterious situation. An MIT professor, Dr. Nuno Loureiro, who was a professor and a director of MIT's Plasma Science and Fusion Center, died Monday night at 47 years old. The MIT announcement about this is euphemistic. He was murdered. So he died by murder. It would be more accurate to say he was murdered. And he was a lauded theoretical physicist and fusion scientist and director of the MIT Plasma Science and Fusion Center. He joined MIT in 2016. His research addressed complex problems lurking at the center of fusion vacuum chambers and at the edges of the universe. So he's looking into plasma behavior, including turbulence, and he uncovered the physics behind astronomical phenomena like solar flares. He was named director of the Plasma Science and Fusion Center in 2024, though he had contributed to the field before that. So do they even talk about the circumstances of his death? He contributed to astrophysics, and sure enough, they don't mention the way he died at all. Kind of shame on you, MIT News. This isn't really news if you don't mention that he was murdered. He was shot in his home. Let's see if we can find another story. MIT professor murdered. And what I want to note is shot at home. All right, BBC has a little bit of a better headline going on. I will share that with you. Here's the BBC.com. Police intensify search for MIT professor's killer. So authorities have intensified their search for clues after a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology was fatally shot, murdered at his home near Boston in Brookline, a lovely, safe, beautiful neighborhood. A nuclear science and engineering professor from Portugal was shot multiple times on Monday and died on Tuesday morning in hospital. No one is in custody, and police are treating the incident as a, quote, active and ongoing homicide investigation. Officers responded to a call for gunshots. Really, they mean a call about gunshots. Interesting wording. At an apartment at about 8:30 p.m. local time. Loureiro was taken by ambulance to a Boston hospital where he died on Tuesday morning, police said. Notice there's no description of what the police found when they arrived. Had he been abandoned by his assailant? Was the assailant there? Was the assailant running away? No details. CBS News, the BBC's U.S. media partner, reported that a neighbor said he heard, quote, 3 loud bangs Monday evening and thought somebody in the apartment building was kicking in a door. Really scary. Eurydice Hersey, another local resident, told Fox News that she met Loureiro through his wife Inez and said the couple had 3 children. That is heartbreaking. It's a family that's feeling such raw horror, terror, she said. And what do you do with something that's indescribable? Loureiro's students visited his apartment to pay their respects, talks about his professional accomplishments, and he shone a bright light as mentor, friend, teacher, colleague, and leader, and was universally admired for his articulate, compassionate manner. Mr. White, the MIT Plasma Science Center's previous director, Dennis White, described him, telling MIT News that. Very heartbreaking, but also pretty mysterious. And now I'm just going to remind you of a couple of things. And not remind you, but tell you, if you're not that familiar with the geography of Massachusetts and Rhode Island, may be totally unrelated. But my first response when I read about the death of Dr. Loureiro was to tell Brian, who told me to shut the shades and lock the door, we're not that far from Brookline right now. And the reason that was his response is that Brookline is about 50 minutes to 2 hours, depending on how you travel, away from Brown University. And what you may not know, if you're not following the Brown University story, again, there was a horrible shooting at Brown University, I believe it was on Friday, is that you may not know that the professor who had convened the classroom that was particularly shot up at Brown University was Jewish, an economics professor, and her specialty was immigration studies, and she advised the Knesset on immigration to Israel. I'll say this again. She advised the Knesset, which is the Israeli parliament, on immigration to Israel. So Loureiro is also a Jewish intellectual in a completely different field. Maybe their Jewishness is irrelevant. Also apparently targeted in the attack and murdered at Brown was a young shining star convener of the Republican Club, a young woman, was murdered. And so maybe all of it is relevant, maybe none of it is relevant, maybe it's all happenstance, but there's a possibility that Jewish intellectuals or intellectuals who are pro-Israel are being targeted. And also what you must know is a person of interest was taken into custody in Rhode Island after the Brown University shooting, but it wasn't the right person. They released that person, according to the authorities. And so now the shooter's on the loose. The Brown University shooter is still on the loose. The story is no longer in the news, but they don't have the shooter. If I were a Brown student, I would still be petrified. I think it's smart that they, dissolved finals and sent everyone home from Brown, although I hate it when educational plans are disrupted, because I think that's part of the attack on civil society, to make students feel like, this could vanish at any time. We can't get through anything, right? On the other hand, there's an active shooter out there. They don't have the shooter. Interestingly, also, Brown University has been scrubbing, deleting the websites, the online record on Brown University websites, right? Not his own social media, of a student. I won't mention his name because he hasn't been charged. There's nothing formally tying him to the attack. I just think it's weird, and a lot of people think it's weird, that Brown University is deleting a student's footprint online. And he was a very active pro-Palestinian scholar, activist of Palestinian descent, Palestinian Lebanese descent. And, that's just weird. It's notable. I'm not going to dox him. I'm not going to out him. He's not charged with anything. But if I had an employer, or I was a fellow at an institute that was a mass shooting crime scene, and all of my pages and my bio and my writings were erased by the university, people would be entitled, I think, to say, hey, why did you wipe out Naomi Wolf's entire academic record at your institution where she's a fellow, or where she's a student or a professor? That's, I think, a legitimate question. So the authorities at Brown are behaving pretty weirdly, and maybe there's still an active shooter on the loose, and maybe there's a connection between the MIT professor and the Brown University shooter. I don't know, but I don't like it. And it does seem like a bigger pattern, whether these elements are part of it, there's a bigger pattern of targeting Jewish intellectuals. And I should note, before I leave this subject, which obviously cuts very close to home because I'm a Jewish intellectual, also, there's a bounty. There's a website that's literally offering up to $100,000 to attackers, murderers, to go after Jewish intellectuals, especially Israeli academics. So and that's a real thing. It's really out there. So thank God for Harmeet Dillon. She's going to look into the attack in New York. Eric Adams is on it, but this is Zoran Mamdani's New York now. And this is Kathy Hochul's New York. And we've got a very weird political situation of the far left and Democrats totally pandering to the Islamist vote, the Somali vote in Minneapolis and in Michigan and in Maine, the Islamist vote generally in New York. And we've got, right-wing white supremacists, right? Christian nationalists, quote unquote. This is the stereotype anyway, MAGA, standing firm with the Jewish community and with Israel. It's really a political reversal of some kinds. I mean, Jews have been the most reliable donors and Democrats for a lot of reasons for many, many decades. So this alliance might be falling apart. I think it should fall apart personally, and we should dance with the one who brung us, as they say. I think it's amazing that in the middle of all this violence, especially since he's been shot at, twice, President Trump held a Hanukkah celebration at the White House. And, all these Jewish leaders sang the blessing over the menorah with him. He lit it, and it's beautiful. Very peaceful, very beautiful. And he honored Laura Loomer, who's been way out front saying, to her credit, you have to call out Qatari funding of American influencers and politicians. You have to name the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. There was a real slap on the wrist, toothless declaration. It has to be stronger, she says, and she's right. President Trump stopped Palestinian immigration for the time being and is reviewing it. He's reviewing and I think pausing and maybe reversing the 190,000 Afghanis who are here on special visas. So he's really taking a lot of substantive action to address the fact that, as J.J. Carroll, with whom I'm having a conflict right now because I named him in my essay among the 4 or 5 influencers who are just dealing out anti-Semitic tropes with no evidence. But what I credit him with is he was a border agent, and he did break the story that the Biden administration was letting in thousands of terrorists and people aligned with terrorist countries, and not vetting them, not returning them, not turning them over to the FBI, which would have been standard practice before the Biden administration. So President Trump is reversing all of that, but it takes a lot. It's like reversing a battleship that has already been overrun by pirates. So that's my riff about that. And I don't want to end that riff without including Christianity, because Christianity is also under attack, as I said. And I will say again, historically, first they go after the Jews and then they go after the Christians. And that's what the Nazis did. First the Jews and then outspoken clerics who opposed the Nazis. Over and over again, that's the pattern. So, and by the way, China, right? There were not many Jews to speak of in China, but as soon as the communists took over, they went after Christians. In the Soviet Union, they went after the Orthodox Church. Everywhere Marxists set up shop, they go after Christians. So, and everywhere Islamists set up shop, there are no churches, right? I mean, Christians cannot worship freely in most of the Muslim countries. And everyone who's so concerned about what's going on in the Middle East should notice that, right? Christians can't worship freely and Jews can't worship freely. So there is an active war against Christians. And this is an article from Genocide Watch. And it's an article that originally appeared in the Washington Post, saying the world notices the persecution of Nigerian Christians. It's not immediately recent. It's this past October, by Robert Royal. So it points out that Christians are attacked and repressed in more countries than are any other religious group. President Trump said something like this, but he is dismissed by legacy media. But it's like literally true. Now the Washington Post is saying it. Sometimes the persecution is so extreme that it gains public attention, and the steady slaughter of Christians in Nigeria is one such case. The violence has prompted Senator Ted Cruz of Texas to introduce legislation holding accountable Nigerian officials who facilitate Islamist jihadist attacks on Christians. And Bill Maher excoriated the news media and others for largely ignoring the bloody persecution of Christians. Maher is, by the way, Jewish, I believe. But Jews know what genocide looks like. According to a report issued in August by the International Society for Civil Liberties and the Rule of Law, an African NGO that documents human rights violations, in the first 7 months of this year alone, more than 7,000 Christians were killed in Nigeria. And Christians of various denominations and also moderate Muslims, which is terrifying, regularly die at the hands of Boko Haram, Fulani militants, and other violent actors. Numbers vary and are difficult to verify, but between 2009 and 2023 in Nigeria, Inter-Society, an NGO, reports at least 52,000 Christians killed, 18,500 abducted. You can assume that that includes the abduction of girls and women, turned into people who are trafficked sexually. This is standard practice in Africa, and unlikely to have survived, and more than 20,000 churches and Christian schools attacked. That's extraordinary. The Nigerian government says that it's not happening, and Nigeria is a member of the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, which calls itself, quote, the collective voice of the Muslim world. So the Nigerian government is doing little or nothing to protect Christians from this attack. The Biden administration left Nigerian Christians out, hung them out to dry. They removed Nigeria from the list of countries of particular concern over religious liberty. The Trump administration is standing up for Nigerian Christians and arguing that at the very least, they should be returned to the CPC list. And in July, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom urged such a move, which can carry with it significant economic and diplomatic consequences. So here you've got, again, the Trump administration, which are supposed to be these, racist, white supremacist fascists, trying to speak up for Black African Christians who are being persecuted at the hands of Black African Muslims. According to Open Doors, a U.S. group that tracks Christian persecution, 82% of Christians killed around the world from October 2022 to September 2023 met their end in Nigeria. And this essay argues that it's imperative that the UN and the EU, which is totally ignoring this, and especially the United States, apply pressure to Nigeria. And this op-ed writer is the author of The Martyrs of the New Millennium, subtitled The Global Persecution of Christians in the 21st Century. So that's a Washington Post article about an op-ed by a guest essayist who's an expert on this subject, showing that Christians in Nigeria have been targeted for years, and that 10 to 20,000 of them, up to 50,000 of them, have been attacked or murdered by Islamists. So it's bad. And again, they'll go after us, they'll go after Christians. It's something very, very serious. We don't want this. I don't want to be reporting on this. I want to be reporting on, international harmony and interfaith joy and celebration. But right now we have to face it. Okay, let's deal with my critics. Imran Ismail, are you a real person? Live in peace and harmony. Have you seen the images coming from Gaza? The IDF is a terrorist organization, and Netanyahu needs to be in jail. Okay. Hamas is also a terrorist organization, and the Hamas leaders need to be in jail. There are horrible violations of human rights on both sides. I've seen the images out of October 7th, and I've seen the images out of Gaza. None of it should have happened. It all violates international law. I would notice, again, not trying to be difficult, and I've been consistent in speaking up for both sides to observe international law and for neither side to target civilians or women and children, hospitals, schools. I got death threats since I called for that in 2014 in Gaza, as well as southern Israel. It's how I met my husband, who had to protect me from very serious threats. I am consistent in calling for Israel and the Palestinian leadership to obey international law and leave civilians out of the conflict. You have to notice, Imran Ismail, that Gaza could have handed back the hostages and stopped that horrific devastation of their people in Gaza. And as soon as the hostages, who were, by the way, treated appallingly, not only deprived of liberty, but tormented, psychologically and physically assaulted, murdered, right? As soon as they were handed back, the bombardment stopped and there's a ceasefire. So I think you have an argument to make, but I think you need to make it with Hamas, who don't live in Gaza. Overwhelmingly, they live in Doha. They're safe from the bombardment, and the people of Palestine are being used as international pawns and hostages. And I think you should also go right now to Egyptian podcasters or to the Egyptian government and say, why didn't you open the Rafah crossing? Why didn't you take refugees who were being bombarded? Why didn't you allow aid trucks to go through? And the Muslim Brotherhood is the reason Egypt will not take Palestinian refugees, because they're afraid of the Muslim Brotherhood destabilizing their society. So it's a much more complicated situation than your question asks. But I really encourage you to consider that Israel withdrew from Gaza. And on October 7th, Gazans were in charge of Gaza, and they made the decision to attack innocent Israeli women and children, babies, take women hostage, rape them, take men hostage, hold them underground for years. So it's a mess, and I stand by to extend the hand of peace. But you guys had your country, in Gaza, and you could have chosen not to do that. And then thousands of people would be alive, and whole sections of Gaza City would not be in rubble. So let's live in peace. Okay, lesson learned. Let's live in peace. Everyone needs to obey international law. Why are they annexing the West Bank? Look, I'm the first to say, no one should be strategizing for a greater Israel. No one should be trying to build settlements on the West Bank. I think the withdrawal from Gaza was the right withdrawal. I think settlers shouldn't create illegal settlements. It's bad. It's bad policy. It's a bad idea. There has to be peace, and we have to live within our borders, both of us. I also think it's a very, very difficult situation in terms of national security. There is, understandably, as long as, respectfully, Palestinians keep sending suicide bombers into civilian areas in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, in Beersheba, and so on, Haifa, rockets into Haifa and across the Negev into Beersheba, there's going to be some popular support for occupying more territory to give civilians more protection from those attacks. So I highly recommend that Palestine stop doing that so we can all live in peace. And just like I recommend to Israel, don't illegally take Palestinian land. All right, being even-handed here. But you've got to understand, I lived in Israel for several years. I speak Hebrew. It is profound. It affects you profoundly when you are on a bus or in a market and there's been a suicide bomber, just who looks like just a normal Palestinian, but they get on a bus and they blow everything up, including themselves, and take innocent civilians with them. It makes it very hard not to fear Palestinians or the proximity of Palestine. So that's not an honorable way to engage. And what would have been much, much better would have been for each country to have spent the last 50 years, 60 years building their own countries and accepting their borders, the 1948 borders, then the 1967 borders, leave it, right? Don't take anyone's land. Don't send anyone to kill civilians across the border. Stop sending rockets. Stop sending bombers. Stop sending settlers, right? I'm with you. But it's a vicious circle. When you send suicide bombers or rockets, people want more space, from the suicide bombers and rockets. I'm sorry. So I'm just going to keep saying, everyone needs to try living in peace and building. I've long believed that building common civil society entities like, universities and camps and soccer teams, and especially businesses, especially in the tech sector, which Palestinians and Israelis are so good at, would do more for peace than any peace treaty. But you have to have people not killing each other in order to do that. So I highly recommend everyone staying within their borders and obeying international law. I'm with you, but you have to be with me. Roscoe Rossi, good friend, Roscoe Rossi. The red string is in the Bible. I don't know where, but it's when one kid comes out first, Sarah, put red string on him to mark him first. The red string, you're right. And I feel like I just read that about that red string in one of the chapters we finished pretty recently. I don't know the meaning of it. I will look it up, but I will note that it's these days, to my knowledge, it's a Kabbalistic thing. And so you see it on kind of people who are into kind of Hollywood Kabbalah. It's not so much an Orthodox Jewish thing, to my knowledge, but I will look into it more. Okay. Let's see. I think I've answered your questions. I think I've answered the questions of the critics and trolls. Keep spreading your propaganda, lol. This is hilarious. I'm sorry that's your response. I think I gave you a very, very measured, positive, peace-oriented response. And it's not propaganda because no one pays me. And I'm an independent journalist. This is my opinion. My opinion is both sides need to live in peace and obey international law and stick within their borders. Boy, do you swing like a pendulum, says Mick Desjard. You're another one that never goes back on what they've said, even after the real facts come out. Other than the shots, I don't agree with much of your reasoning. Okay, well, that's not substantive. If you have a substantive disagreement, some evidence that I'm wrong, share it. I'm happy to engage with it. But I don't find personal attacks or baseless criticism useful. We really need to have good discussions, open civil discussions, to live in peace again, to respect one another deeply. Look, I'd like nothing more than I used to go to Friday night services at my local NYU Islamic Center to show solidarity to my Muslim neighbors and to show that I wasn't on board with Bush era targeting of Muslims. You guys have to reestablish that you're reaching out a hand. Okay, a peaceful hand, seriously, because I'd be scared to do that now. And that isn't me that changed. That's you guys. I'm sorry, but I will invite you. I will keep inviting you. Anyone, I've invited all the anti-Semitic podcasters whom I know to come with me to synagogue so they can see what Jews really believe. I wish that we could start a program that would not erupt in explosions in which Muslims go to Shabbat services and Jews go to, Ramadan services and everyone goes to church. We need that, right? But I'm doing my part. I'm sharing what we believe subjectively. It's what I know. It's not speaking for every Jew. I would love to hear more voices coming from the moderate Islamic world. I haven't heard many, bemoaning the violence and inviting us to commune in peace and fellowship. And obviously, I would like to, have Christians join in the fun, because we should be living these days, 21st century, in an inclusive civil society in which everyone has freedom of conscience. Whether there's a state religion or not, and we all respect each other and we live in peace. So I'm going to end there. And you can call that propaganda if you want, but all the great prophets from Jesus to Muhammad to Moses said that God wanted us to live in peace. So we better live in peace, is my view, or we will be held accountable for it in the afterlife. So I am signing off. Thank you for joining me. This is Naomi Wolf. You only get this podcast because of your donations and subscriptions on Substack to Outspoken. That's what pays for the production, the distribution, the social media, the editing. Same thing over on Daily Clout. And over on Daily Clout, billcam.com and legisector.com, you also have tools to follow legislation, stop bad bills, launch good bills, and pass them from your phone. But again, it costs money to keep that tech running, to hire the developers, to get it out there, keep it smooth. We need your support. Coming up to the end of the year, make a gift, please. That's how we operate. And no one else is doing what we're doing at Daily Cloud or over on Substack with Outspoken. I'm going to sign off now, and I'm going to thank our sponsors. There is a worldwide rush for gold right now and precious metals. China is buying gold. There are rumors that the Federal Reserve will be using gold to pay off federal debt, or the federal government will be using gold to pay off federal debt. Famous investors are buying gold. And there's a movement away from the dollar worldwide. And you can see that there are warning signs in the economy that appeared before the Great Depression in 2008 that are flashing red right now. So in all this instability, it is a very good idea to protect your savings, to protect your IRA by diversifying into precious metals, especially gold. There are a lot of gold companies out there. Not all of them are kosher. Not all of them are responsible businesses. American Alternative Assets really is. And we're very, very proud to have them as a sponsor. We're very picky about our sponsors, and we only accept sponsors who have products that we either use or invest in ourselves. So I really encourage you to go to cloutgold.com, cloutgold.com, and get a free report explaining to you what the risks are of not diversifying into gold and silver. And I just want to note that when Brian and I started talking about investing in gold 5 years ago, when it first became clear that you could do that easily, if we'd put in $1,000 then, it would be $5,000 now. If we'd put in $10,000 then, it would be $50,000 now, and so on. So obviously you can't predict everything about the future, but gold there's a limited amount of it on the planet. And in a time when you can have your assets switched off, if they're digital, like the truckers in Canada had their bank account switched off. People in Spain are having their bank account switched off. All of China is now on a social credit system. Your assets can be switched off. And Europe is pushing for central bank digital currency. Now is the time to diversify into gold, which can't be tracked, can't be shut off, can't be taken away from you. So I'm really proud to have American Alternative Assets as a sponsor, and you really need to go to cloutgold.com and get that report, cloutgold.com, and find out how you can protect your IRA and savings by putting some or all of it into gold. Okay, you guys, I love you to bits, and I will see you later. This is Naomi Wolf at Daily Clout. Bye-bye.